getting like $100,000 advance. Electronic musicians have always kind of been left in the dark a bit when it comes to music business. How did you define the visual art direction of the label? Let's say Axtone, Anjuna Deep, Mousetrap, doesn't really matter which one, but what if I submitted a song and the label likes the song and wants to sign it and accept it? What then happens? I guess the biggest clauses you want to look out for. First of all, you're Mousetrap, you're awesome. Hey guys, welcome to the Kane audio vlog. It is Friday. It's time for another Ask Me Anything. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll get back to you in next week's video. Before I look at last week's video, is there any house admin? Yes. First of all, it's actually Friday, so yeah, there we go. It's been a long time since I filmed this on an actual Friday, so I have coffee and it's first thing in the morning, just how I like it. Aside from that, those of you that subscribe to Sonic Academy, those of you that don't should. I do highly recommend it if you're, well, anything from beginner through to advanced producer. To be honest, there is some really good resources on there, and I know from having a chat with them recently, they've got some really cool stuff coming in the future as well. But anyway, if you are a subscriber to Sonic Academy, then you will find that last week my Bitwig for beginners went up. So it's like a level 1 course. It assumes you know pretty much nothing about anything in music production. So if you're a super advanced producer, then don't expect to learn anything other than just the basics of Bitwig. I've sort of tried to make it just available to anyone, basically. So yeah, so it is very beginnery. But yeah, it's basically a mirror of they have a Logic course, they've got Ableton, they've got all the doors basically. So Bitwig is now there as well, level 1, which means I'll at some point do level 2, level 3 and so on and so forth. So there we go. I think that is basically it for house admin this week. If you're in the UK, welcome to lockdown 2.0. If you're outside of the UK, then we're in a lockdown 2.0. Yeah, that's a bit bad, but it's been expected, hasn't it? I think, well, let's be honest, I've been talking about it for a long time here, saying that the second wave is coming, and we should have really had a lockdown way before this, but whatever, better late than never. So yeah, so I don't know what's going to happen to the viewing figures here again, because obviously during the first lockdown it all dropped off, but this time I think people are kind of just used to not being in work and stuff now, so we're kind of just used to it all, I suppose. And what else on that real world front? The American election is going on. I really don't even have anything to say at this point. There isn't an official winner at this stage. Who knows what's going to happen? It's squeaky bum time. Yeah, I think there's nothing really major to update this week in terms of house admin. The Spotify was updated last week. For those of you that are new to the channel, I run a Spotify playlist which is kind of in line with my record label, and it's called 5302 Electronica. Check it out. There is always some amazing music being put there. If you find, so what I'm going to do now is I think I'm going to start linking to my personal profile on Spotify, because I've actually got a couple of 5302 playlists. There's 5302 Electronica, which is the one that gets a complete refresh every couple of weeks, but those refreshed files then get put onto 5302 Archive, which is like a super long playlist of everything I've ever put on that list. And I'm now starting to sort of share that as well, because a few people have asked for it. So there'll be a link below this video. I'm just thinking out loud, really. There we go. There's not going to be many questions by the looks of it. There's literally only 3 comments on last week's video, so I'll dive straight in. Starting with Silver Dragon. Thanks, Dom, for answering my question. I will have to check out the book. So this was you're welcome. This was the book How to Succeed in, I've forgotten it again now, was it music industry or music business? Music business, I think. If I've got that wrong, look at last week's video. I mentioned it in there and I looked it up. Yeah, a book worth reading. Like I say, it's going to be out of date. I'm sure there's probably a revised version by now, but it'll still be out of date. And this is, I think, following on from what I was saying about resources for the music industry, pretty much anything that comes out will almost immediately be out of date. So in fact, I'll give you an example. I mentioned 2 minutes ago in House Admin, I've done the Bitwig's beginners course, and I mentioned at the very beginning of the course I'm on version 3.2.8, I think, at the time, and the video is like 17 videos long, and I think by the time I'd got to video 10, 11, 12, something like that, version 3.3 came out. Don't worry, I don't change version. I stick to the same version just in case. But it's one of those things where, you know, I hadn't even finished filming the video series, and already there was a new version of Bitwig available. So, you know, these things, while they stay somewhat relevant, they do also date. So this book I was talking about, How to Succeed in the Music Business, it talks about contracts and things. And if I remember rightly, I mean, this was probably, you know, the best part of 20 years ago I read it, but if I remember rightly, it talks about contracts with record labels, and I'm fairly sure it was talking about, you know, getting like $100,000 advance and 18% royalty. Well, I mean, those figures are completely out of date now. Don't get me wrong; some people still get $100,000 advance, and some people get 18% royalty. But with the whole digital streaming age, it tends to be no advance and 50% royalties, generally speaking. So yeah, so it's just, you know, you got to kind of take it with a pinch of salt, but it does cover things like, you know, where royalties come from, how royalties work, and where the money comes from, basically, which I think is probably quite important and probably still relevant today to an extent. I think electronic musicians have always kind of been left in the dark a bit when it comes to music business stuff, partly because I think traditionally in the 80s, 90s, kind of in the noughties as well, you know, I know a lot of DJs and promoters who were all cash in hand, and they weren't really legit businesses. They were earning good money, don't get me wrong, but they weren't fully fledged legitimate businesses, and everything was a bit, you know, we come from rave culture where everything was kind of anti everything, so it was a different time, whereas today I think everything is a bit more formal and everything is a bit more business orientated, and there we go. Anyway, waffling. I'm answering last week's question again. Fanfan87, salut Dom, technology, high five. Love the new intro. You should ask Moog to support this channel at this point. I probably should. I mean, I technically my entire career is endorsed by Moog, although I am very proud to say I am a Moog endorsed artist. So yeah, so I think I'm legitimately allowed to have that many Moogs on the intro and everything. I think that's basically all I showed, wasn't it, in the intro? I can't remember, but let's be honest, they're the better looking things in this room. Question about 5302. How did you define the visual art direction of the label? Why those colours, those pictures, landscapes, forms, etc.? Good question. So it's a tricky one. The visual art direction of the label itself, I kind of So talking to Jonathan, who is known as Deadly Custard on this channel, and in many places, he is the guy behind creating my visual ideas for my album and for the label. So big shout out to John there. So basically I had the idea of an upside down tree because I knew the album was called Artificial Roots, and I knew the label was going to be called 5302, and I wanted the direction of the label to be, how do I even explain it? I think basically I want the art direction of the label to grow quite organically. I want it, and I still don't think it's there. It's not there yet, but it's slowly getting there. And I think, you know, as I release more releases, and you know, with each release, I've spoken to the artists and sort of said, look, I'm happy to collaborate. I'm happy to commission. I would love for you guys to commission something yourself. If you think, you know, if you have an idea, if you have a direction for each release's artwork, I want to see that grow with it, because I want it to be a complete body of work, which was really how I sort of saw my album. Was, you know, the album artwork, I sort of went to Deadly Custard with an idea, and he, don't get me wrong, he made it better than I'd even imagined. And he added to those ideas fantastically. But again, I knew roughly what I wanted, and I think I knew the emotion I wanted to feel from looking at it. So, and I think that's similar across the board for 5302, which is why I'm referring to my album, because it's kind of the only artwork that's been put out yet from 5302. So the 5302 logo itself, you'll notice if I take my coffee cup off my coaster, I don't know if you can, I don't even know if that's, I don't know how in focus that is, but yeah, so the 5302, you know, that's got the artwork of the tree behind the numbers, and the idea of the 5302 logo is that it's kind of not a logo. It's more just an empty space for the artist's artwork to give way behind. So that's the art direction. The art direction is that there is no art direction, and that it's a canvas for each release. Does that make any sense whatsoever? I have no idea. I feel like I'm just talking rubbish at the minute, but hopefully that makes sense, because that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I want it, you know, 5302 is kind of the host of the artwork for each release, and that's kind of the point, I think. I think it will develop its own identity over time. But my original plan, and this is maybe not going to plan quite yet, but my original plan was that, for example, with my album, you could, for example, buy a coaster or a hoodie or whatever with the 5302 logo specific to Artificial Roots. There's no mention of Artificial Roots. There's no mention of Dom Kane. There's no mention of anything. There's no mention of any record label. It literally is just 5302. And that's kind of the point, is that it's not, there is no ego in the artwork. There's no ego in the record label. And there shouldn't be any ego in the artist release either. And I think that's kind of crucial to the artwork, is that it just provides a platform for the release. So yeah, so why those colors, those pictures, landscape forms, etc. I think in terms of coloring, I'm quite open. So again, Deadly Custard did the 5302 Electronica playlist artwork. Again, there'll be a link below on Spotify, which I mentioned at the beginning of this video. which I think is almost radically different to the Artificial Roots artwork, but at the same time I find it representative of the music, and I think that's kind of the point. So why those colours, pictures, landscapes? They're just something that appeals to me, and they're something that I feel represents the music within. And over the next few releases, you will see more and more. I know with the Deadly Custard release coming up in next month, he's done his own artwork because he's a fantastic visual artist as well as a musical artist, and again, it's representative of the music and the EP title, and it fits the bill, and so the 5302 logo will adapt accordingly over time. So there we go. That's a very weird answer, I think, but there we go. P.S. Love Marin Rados's profile picture, Epic Radio. There we go. And talking of Marin Rados, hi Dom, watching this video I just thought about record labels and some stuff that you talked about in the video, and I'd like to know, what if I submitted a song on a bigger record label, let's say Axtone, Anjuna Deep, Mousetrap, doesn't really matter which one, but what if I submitted a song and the label likes the song and wants to sign it and accept it? What then happens? Do they send you a contract, and what are some important things in that contract to look out for to make sure the deal is fair, and so on? I always knew about how you can submit your music to labels, but I've never really heard about what happens when the label actually wants to sign your music. What happens then? What things are good to know in advance and what to look out for? Basically, how to approach these kinds of things. Thank you in advance for answering. Read more. Have a nice day. Technology high five. Good question. I mean, if I'm really honest, it's kind of a bit boring and a bit of a letdown. When a label of that size signs your music first time round, so I'll use Mousetrap as an example. When I first signed, what was my first track? Running Out, I think, to Mousetrap way back when in 2015. Yeah. Has it been 5 years? Yeah. So Chris, who no longer works at Mousetrap, was running Mousetrap at the time. And I kind of knew him anyway, so maybe it was a little bit different for me, but it was, you could tell he was passionate about the track and where I was going musically. So it was a bit of a conversation, and then a kind of a discussion of, we'd like to release it as part of this release or as a single or whatever. I think that first release went on We Are Friends, if I remember rightly. It was We Are Friends 5. So that was the kind of discussion, the back and forth by email, I think. And I think this is a fairly typical situation. So they'll come back to you and they'll say, love this track. We're thinking it might fit on X, Y, and Z. So I think that's one thing to be aware of. I have had another big, probably equally big record label that I won't name for reasons that are about to become obvious. I sent them a track. This is way before Mousetrap. I sent them a track. The guy came back saying, love it. I want it to be part of such and such compilation, which is generally how the bigger labels will kind of start you off as an artist. We want it to be as part of a... No, sorry, I'm lying. He came back saying he wanted it as a single first. So I thought, great. And then we thrashed out a couple of details, and then he went silent. And then weeks, maybe even a month later, he said, oh, actually, yeah, we want this track still, but we want to put it out as part of a compilation. So I thought, well, that's a bit of a letdown. It's, compilation, being part of 20 other artists, you're kind of lost in it, and it's not as good as a lead single. I think we can all see why. And so I said, okay, fine, that's the compilation. And then he went silent. And probably a month or two again later, I kept sort of chasing him and not getting responses. And then he eventually came back saying he wanted it to be part of some online something or other, basically just worse than a compilation. Because initially, because this is quite a few years ago, we're talking CD compilation, and then eventually it became some online nothing amongst a bunch of other artists that no one had ever heard of. So it just kept getting downgraded to the point where I said, you know what, just forget it, I'm done. I think at that point it had been 6 months of discussing and negotiating, and really nothing was discussed or negotiated other than him just leading me on. So you will find some labels will do that. So I think it's worth those discussions early on before you sign a contract. That's really where the real work is done. I think you need to stand firm in what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Now, as far as I'm concerned, when it came to Mousetrap, I went out as part of a compilation, and that was agreed, and I was more than happy for that, because I was a big fan of We Are Friends, and I still think it's a great compilation. I still think it's a great way of introducing new artists to the label, and I think Mousetrap fans like it as well, and that's kind of important. Whereas with this other label, this was kind of a new half-assed compilation that nobody had heard of, full of artists that nobody had heard of, and there was no following, there was no whatever, and the fact that they'd originally offered me much better deals, and then we'd come down to this, and it just didn't sit right with me. So I guess bear all of that in mind. Also, don't expect too much, because I think with any label, even when you're signing to majors, if you're only signing a single deal or whatever, don't expect too much in the way of, you're not going to be a celebrity overnight. You're not going to be, having limousines everywhere and eating caviar on toast for breakfast. It's not the way it works. So it's pretty straightforward and pretty boring, to be honest. So, like I say, so that was the deal with Mousetrap. Was he said, We Are Friends. I said yes, and then I think he sent the contract pretty much straight away, which is generally how they really want it, is if they send the contract straight away. Signed the contract, done deal, great. And then it was a case of carrying on the conversation. Now I'd really established contact with this person and the A&R process, and I kind of had a chat with him, and he wanted to gauge where I was, and I wanted to gauge where he was in terms of future releases, and we kind of put together a rough idea of a plan of, right, let's get some more singles. He mentioned that he was he'd come up with an idea of an EP called 4 More, or More 4, I can't remember, 4 More, and I think most of you watching this will probably know that EP series. So he'd already mentioned that, and I thought, yeah, that's also a good thing. And then he'd mentioned potential EP further down the line, and sort of, once things got into place. So I think there's not really much to expect, and I guess you never really know what the process is. Some labels will want you to do everything from artwork to mastering to mixdown to whatever, but I think every label should also be open-minded. So if you can't master a track, just tell the label, I'm not any good at mastering, and they might tell you, well, go to a professional, or they might tell you, well, we know someone, or whatever. There's already been a release or two on 5302 where I've done the mix down of one of the tracks because I just kept going, oh, can you change this? And I wasn't quite, something needed tweaking. And eventually I go, actually, you know what, just give me the stems. Let me show you what I'm thinking. And I sent it back and they went, yeah, well, that's the one, isn't it? So it should be somewhat collaborative, but I guess it's a bit different with me for 5302 because I'm also a producer engineer. So it's a bit easier for me to sort of just grab everything by the reins then. But yeah, essentially you get the contract, you sign it. In terms of things to look for from a contract, I guess the biggest clauses you want to look out for, first of all, timescale. So there's a couple of things to think of when it comes to timescale. I like to, and this is the other thing, is I'll be honest, if you go with Anjuna Deep, Axtone or Mousetrap, those three especially, and pretty much any label in that sort of, that size, you will find that they're pretty much non-negotiable contracts most of the time. Unless you're a massive talent or have a good management team, then you pretty much need to just take whatever they give you. I'm going to be honest. But the things to look out for, a timescale in terms of some labels will say, we'll release this within 180 days of signing it, and there should be a get out clause in your favor. You want a clause that says something along the lines of, if this release isn't published within 180 days of contract date, then all rights go back to the artist. That's kind of how it should be, I think. Because let's be honest, you don't really want a record label signing your music and then just doing nothing with it and not releasing it. And even worse, you don't want, and this has happened to me before with a couple of labels where I signed a track maybe, say December, and then the track hasn't come out till August the next year. And you listen to it and you're like, oh, this is old now, this is terrible. My production skills have moved from there. So that can be quite annoying and sometimes quite detrimental for some people. So I guess that's one thing. And then the other thing is to look for how long they hold the rights for. Again, most labels will go for in perpetuity, which means that they own the rights to your master forever. I disagree with that from both an artist perspective and a label perspective. So again, talking about 5302, I've tweaked that kind of a clause for 5302, and while the label still has the option to keep it forever, I've also made it clear that there is a clause for discussion and review of that every 5 years, because at the end of the day, if I sign a track from an artist and it sells well and does whatever, and that's fine, and then 5 years later, if it's not selling anything, it's not doing anything, then do I really need to keep it on the catalogue? Is it that vital? If the artist wants to redo it and go elsewhere, then they should really have an opportunity to do that, and I think that's quite important as an artist. However, as a label, I can understand that might not be the case, and so it will and probably should always swing in favour of the label, because equally so, if you write a song that I sign and it becomes a smash hit in 5 years' time, I don't want you, and if it's still selling, platinum, I don't want you to then go, right, I'm taking it somewhere else now. Bye. When I did all the hard work in the first place to make it that smash hit. Hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, I guess those are really the things to look out for. The other thing, and I'm not saying that any of these should or shouldn't be signed, because they are totally optional for you, and some people like these things, some people don't. The other thing is then is the label taking a publishing cut? By law, there is no reason for a label to demand taking a publishing cut. Until somewhat recently, it was really frowned upon that they would do that. Nowadays, it's a bit different. Pretty much most labels will try and get the publishing. 5302 will definitely. In fact, I would say I'll take that a step further for 5302. Again, I'm trying to be somewhat different with 5302, so this is apologies for that. Camera hit 30 minutes again. 5302. I would take that a step further and say that I probably wouldn't sign a track on to 5302 without taking the publishing on board as well. But there's a valid reason for that, and that's because 5302 focuses heavily on publishing and synchronization. So, it's in your interest to sign over some publishing to 5302, because the concept of 5302 is that we're not just looking for sales and streaming, we're looking for positioning and licensing as well. So it's a bit different to your average record label. So yeah, I guess those are really the key things to look out for in a record deal. It's kind of a tricky one, because I think, usually by the time you get to a position of signing a record deal with a really big record label, usually you've kind of already done a bunch of record deals with smaller record labels in the past, because you kind of, most of these bigger labels will look for an artist that has a history of releasing and whatever. And so yeah, usually by the time you get there, you kind of know what you're looking for anyway. But I would say those are the main things to look for. And one more thing. I know Mousetrap have a clause, and actually, I'm not sure how. I think a few of them do have this clause, but it's I can't remember the actual numbers, but it's along the lines of basically, in plain English, it's along the lines of once you sign this contract, we get first refusal on everything you create for the next, I think, 6 months or something like that. So it means that and the reason for that is because let's say that's a clause on 5302 and I sign a track from you, and that track blows up, it goes global top 10. I, as a label, don't want you to then write another song and for me to not have an opportunity to sign it again. So I would always, again, all contracts are kind of skewed in favour of the label, because it's the label that creates the contract. But also, I think as an artist, that shouldn't be a scary term, because, with Mousetrap, for example, when I signed tracks over to them, I'm looking at that going, of course I'm going to give you first refusal for the next however long, 6 months or whatever, because you're Mousetrap, you're awesome. I have no doubt that I'm going to send it to you first. I want you to release more of my music. So I don't think that should be a scary term, but it is one to look out for, just in case maybe a label starts demanding that they get first refusal for the next, 5 years or something, in which case don't sign that. That's just silly, because that clause basically means they own your ass for whatever length of time that is. They own you, and if that's 3 months, 6 months, okay, you can deal with that, because for me personally, I'm not one of these producers that just churns out releases, as I'm sure you well know. I don't put out 10 EPs a year and an album every year or whatever, and I certainly don't put out singles every week or month like some artists do. It's just not my thing, it's not my style, and I don't see any benefit in doing that, other than taking the life approach of throw enough shit at a wall and hope something sticks. So based on that, I'm happy to be owned for 6 months, knowing that if I write another single that I think this is, let's say, for example, I signed that clause for some 2-bit operation who owned me for the next 6 months, or had first refusal for the next 6 months, and that track did well, but I ended up arguing with the label and didn't get on, and it was just not working. Well, I can wait 6 months, because by the time you sign the contract and then say, the track comes out 3 months later or whatever, then you're really only a few months away. So if you've written a track that's bigger and better than that one and you want to go elsewhere, you can wait a few months. It's not a big deal. But I think if they try and push you for 3 years, well, that is a big deal, because in this industry, as much as almost the opposite of what I've just been saying, where I say I only kind of release maybe 1 or 2 EPs a year, I'm not a big releaser. At the same time, I'm also very well aware that this industry thrives on momentum, which is why people release every week or month or whatever. I just don't care for that momentum. I'd rather release quality stuff than just numbers games. It's not my thing, as I'm sure you can all tell by the number of views on these videos or the number of subscribers of this channel or the number of streams of my music or whatever. There we go. That, my friends, is it for this week. I think I waffled surprisingly long for only 3 comments. If you've made it this far into the video, then comment the word mistake, because I can see a video here that says, why would anybody buy this camera? Did I make a mistake? The answer is probably no, because it's usually clickbait. Hope everyone has a good week. If you're in the UK, stay safe. Please follow the rules. I know the rules are kind of vague and kind of changing every day, but please just follow your common sense. Wear a mask. Keep your distance. Don't be a dick. See you next week. Cheers.